Why do so many people struggle with fat loss even though they're doing everything that they're told? Cutting out carbs, eating clean, and doing endless cardio, but they're still not seeing results. They're definitely not lazy because they're probably actually doing more work than they really need to be. But they are missing this one key component that actually drives fat loss, and that's being in a calorie deficit. I had to learn this the hard way for myself. I trained hard, I was eating clean, thought I was doing everything right, but I was still carrying around like an extra 25 pounds of body fat. It wasn't until I actually learned and understood how to set up a calorie deficit and stick to it that I saw fat loss progress week after week after week. In this video, I'm going to share with you my 7-step system for how to set up your calorie deficit diet the right way so you can actually stick to it. This includes setting goals, creating a timeline, understanding your why, choosing your strategy, planning for success, and tracking your progress. Let's get started with what truly drives fat loss. So what is a calorie deficit? You're training hard, you're eating clean, but the scale isn't budging. That's because fat loss isn't about cardio or cutting out carbohydrates. It's about energy balance. Now, stick with me. I want you to think of it in terms of your body is like a bank account. It spends calories every single day to make sure that you have enough energy to move around, to breathe, to think, to see, to hear. If your body burns 2,000 calories every single day to make all these things happen, and you only feed it 1,500, your body's going to have to go into its savings account and pull out 500 calories. This is also known as your fat tissue. Right? The goal isn't to starve yourself. You're creating a controlled energy gap between the amount of calories that you need and then the amount of calories that you're actually feeding it. And that's what's actually going to drive fat loss. Now let's look at what you need to start a calorie deficit diet. Let's get started with step 1, goal setting. Most people overlook this step, but it truly is the one thing that's going to separate the next random diet or making real progress. Think of this as building your roadmap. You want to know a few things before you start driving anywhere, like where you're going, how long is it going to take you to get there, and why are you taking this journey in the first place? So let's get started with where are we going, right? How much weight do we want to lose? Now, this is a really personal and individual question, and it really is based on your current health situation, your goals, and your lifestyle. So it's important that you take all those things into consideration when determining how much weight you want to lose. But you can expect to lose about 1 to 2 pounds per week as far as a healthy range is concerned. Now let's get started with the timeline, right? How long is it going to take us to get there? Now, if you have 30 pounds to lose, you can probably do that in about, call it 4 to 6 months. But if you have more than 30 pounds to lose, you might want to break it up into different phases to make it a little bit more sustainable in the long term. Finally, it's important to know your reason why. I would encourage you to ask yourself 2 questions. First, why is this goal important to me? And second, why am I going to be willing to prioritize this goal over doing something else? Insert meal prepping instead of watching Sunday football as an example. This clarity of knowing where you're going, how long it's going to take you to get there, and the reason why you're doing it is going to keep you consistent when motivation fades. Let's move on to step number 2, which is how to find your calories. Calories are going to be the only driver for fat loss. Not cardio, not cutting out food groups, calories. When I first learned this, it was eye-opening. It changed my view on dieting forever, right? Calories weren't good or bad. They were just a unit of energy, right? The energy that we find in food or the energy that we burn to stay alive every single day. Now, in order to have fat loss happen, you need to eat fewer calories than you burn every single day, right? That's the calorie deficit. Now, in order to find a calorie deficit, we need to understand what is our maintenance level of calories. How many calories does it take to actually maintain our body weight? Now, to do this, you can simply use an online calculator. The one I'm using here, I'll go ahead and leave a link down below. Once you know that number, you can create a calorie deficit, anywhere between 250 to 750 calories less every single day. Now, the size of the gap does depend on you. And I will say, if your life is busy and stressful, chaotic, and a lot of things going on, you might want to stick with a more moderate or light calorie deficit, right? But if your life is in a place where you can plan and you can structure and you can give a lot of time to this dieting phase, then you might be able to push the upper limits of that calorie deficit. Now, I will say you don't need to go to extremes. We're not Brad Pitt getting ready for his next movie role, right? A moderate calorie deficit for most people in most circumstances will give the best of both worlds, right? Consistent fat loss progress, but also enough energy to live your life. Moving on to step number 3, it's about setting up your strategy. Once you have found your maintenance level of calories and your calorie deficit, it's time to actually figure out how we're gonna make this happen. Now, you may have heard of the saying, right? Eat less and move more. It's simple and honestly not that helpful. So let's break it down a little bit more. Now, eating less does not mean that we are starving ourselves. It means you have a calorie budget and you try to meet that every single day. Your meals should fit into that range and they also should keep you full for a good amount of time. You do that by making sure that you're choosing balanced meals that include all the food groups. And this ensures that you're getting all the nutrients that your body needs, right? Protein, fiber, vitamins, minerals. Now, on the moving side of things, that does not mean you're going from couch potato to training 2-a-days, right? You're just focusing on the basics. You're getting in a few strength training sessions every single week. You're getting in your steps or your daily movement every single day, so 7,000 to 12,000 steps, and you're getting in a few cardiovascular sessions of training every single week. Really, you can think of it like this balancing act where you're trying to maintain your calorie deficit so you get some fat loss, but you're also trying to strength train to maintain those muscles. You're also maintaining a daily movement pattern to stay active. And finally, you're getting all the nutrients and nourishment that your body needs so that you can feel your best, right? Fat loss is not a quick sprint. It's a rhythm between the eating, the training, the rest and recovery, and that you can actually stick to over time. As the saying goes, either you have a plan to succeed or you lack a plan to fail. So now that you know your goals, maintenance calories, calorie deficit, and somewhat of a strategy, it's time to make some room for all of it in your schedule. So let's pull out our calendars and let's start by adding a start and an end date. This is going to give you a clear view of the timeline for where you can fit in things like your workouts or meal planning and prep, or your other priorities as well. Next, let's go through and schedule in our weekly to-dos. Things like our workouts, meal planning, meal prep, grocery shopping, all the food stuff normally takes about 2 to 4 hours for most people to get it all prepped for the week. So make sure you have some room for that in your schedule. Then go through and add in when you are going to do some progress updates, right? You're going to make sure that you weigh in. You're going to do a progress photo. You're going to do your updating of your measurements as well. And finally, and really, really importantly, I want you to go through and I want you to identify any obstacles that are going to come up in between the start date and the finish date. I want you to write them down and I want you to ask yourself, how are you going to maintain consistency during this period of time? And how are you going to get back on track when your routine levels out? It's about creating a clear path so that you can stay consistent while life gets a little busy or chaotic. Step 7, track your progress. What gets measured gets managed. If you're not tracking, you're guessing. Fat loss isn't always as obvious day to day. It really does take the data to paint a bigger picture of what's going on, and that is where tracking and self-monitoring come into play. Here are a few tools that I use and I always suggest to my clients, and those include a body weight scale to check in on weekly or even daily weight trends, a food tracking application so that you can keep an eye on your overall calorie intake, and having some sort of progress photos that can show you changes that the scale oftentimes can miss. Each one of these gives you some sort of feedback, and together they all give you a little bit of a bigger picture of what's going on, what's working, what's not working, and where you need to make adjustments. Tracking keeps you accountable, it keeps you honest, and it keeps you aware. And that awareness is what drives those results. That's how you start a calorie deficit diet the right way. You set your goals, you found your calorie targets, you built a plan that fits your life, and you learned how to track it. When you stay consistent with those tips, the results will follow.